Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Darsh Shah.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare.
All right, guys, welcome back to another Lessons Learned, where Darsh and I are revisiting the insightful conversations with our recent guests, Dr. Beth Frates and Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. But before we start, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever considered a different way of practicing medicine? Whether you are burned out, need a change of pace, or are looking to supplement your income, locum tenens might be the solution for you. Not sure where to start? Locumstory.com is the place where you can get real, unbiased answers to your questions. They answer basic questions like, what is locum tenens? To more complex questions about pay ranges, taxes, various specialties, and how locum tenens can work for you. Go to locumstory.com or drpodcastnetwork.com/locumstory and get the answers. Well, guys, like I said before, I cannot recommend the original episodes with Dr. Beth Frates and Dr. B enough, because these are some inspiring individuals who are leaders in their respective fields, and they have a great deal of knowledge to share with you. So here, Darsh and I recap some of our key takeaways and offer our own insight into several points made by both these individuals. We spent a good deal of time discussing stress and its role in cardiovascular disease and overall health. We reviewed the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine, as Dr. Frates mentioned, and elaborate on the less common ones that are often overlooked but extremely important, as evident by the recent affairs of the world. We then shift gears to discuss the microbiome, talk about the archaea, touch on some cool studies that we recently came across and how they relate to both of these discussions. Lastly, we add some context to the plant-based diet, including some environmental benefits that weren't discussed by either of our guests. So without further delay, please enjoy this Lessons Learned episode.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're doing another Lessons Learned here with myself and Dr. Raja. Altamash, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, buddy. How are you?
Good. You all settled into your new place?
I wouldn't say I'm settled in, but moved in for sure.
Stressful. That's stressful stuff, man. I absolutely hate moving, but so you ready for fellowship then, huh? Will you start July 1st?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much done with residency. We graduated officially, but we got our formal virtual ceremony tonight. That'll be wrapped up, and then just taking a little break, just like you are, going on a little vacation, and then getting ready. Studying for boards too.
Yeah. Fun stuff, man. Lots to look forward to. Awesome. Well, our previous 3 episodes were absolutely fantastic, right? Some pretty prominent names in the field of medicine, each doing something a little different. So, first up, we had Dr. Beth Frates, the pioneer of lifestyle medicine, the president-elect of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Awesome episode. Tell us a little bit about what you took away from that.
My first takeaway was that I really enjoyed her inspiration to go into medicine, right? Her story, patient zero being her father, who was just a New Yorker to his core. Like she said, he walked fast, talked fast, did everything fast, and just never considered his lifestyle, and it's always just go, which of course we can relate to as residents and healthcare practitioners, but really anybody in today's day and age, no matter what the profession. And when he faced that, we'll call it adversity, of having a heart attack and a stroke simultaneously, it really made her reconsider her whole approach. So much so that, initially, at the time she was 18 years old, right? And it's difficult when you're a teenager and somebody you look up to, like a parent who is a role model, a hero. We don't think about their mortality, especially at that age. And something devastating like that happens, and you kind of have to watch your parent not being able to function. As she said, her job was to make sure that he regains function in his hand. That's pretty scary. So I'm always interested to learn about people's story, what makes them who they are. And that one kind of struck home with me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, she calls it patient zero, right? Her first patient being her father, which really gave her this exposure into what she now knows is lifestyle medicine, right? Back then, it was kind of just like, a heart attack, stress, stroke. How do these things happen? What's the root cause of these things? And, it's a sign of the times where we're at now, where everyone's in this rush pace. You just said as residents, and it's funny, man, I just finished up my intern year earlier this week, and man, it just feels like 1,000 pounds have just come off me. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, the day after my last day, I was so physically and emotionally drained. I was just like, what am I feeling? And it was just literally like this catharsis of the last year, going through COVID, working 70 plus hours, just constantly on the go. And these like last few days have just been unbelievable in terms of just having that, rest, knowing that, I'm going into PM&R. So, it's a constant reminder of, hey, we need to slow things down, because when you're in that go rush, it's so tough to just pause and reflect at what am I doing right now, right? Because we're so caught in that quote unquote flow, I guess we can call it. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and what was interesting about that is that kind of inspired her to kind of look at the field of cardiology. But then as she started interviewing experts in the field and what their life is all about, and what their lifestyle is all about, she came across a physician who, again, some things that she knew, she had insight to what was important to her, such as having children. That was really important. And how does that all work? She started to see a lot of the similar patterns, as she mentioned that her dad had, and then quickly realized, okay, this isn't the right approach for me, because she knew what she didn't want to do, which path, and this path was getting awfully close to the path that she didn't want to walk down. So let's shift gears to talk about just, we're kind of alluding to this concept of stress and how it impacts cardiovascular disease. And I think that it's extremely well documented, and there's tons of literature to support the effects of both acute and chronic stress on the cardiovascular system. And most people can probably appreciate blood pressure, and then, that goes in hand with different types of stroke, right? But what people might not be as familiar with is the heart attack component, right? The coronary artery disease, like the plaques and those types of things, just for lay purposes. And that kind of gave her this idea of looking at that thesis and how you can have EKG changes. So I thought that was really, really cool. What do you remember from that?
So I know, I just want to take a step back. When you talk about stress, I think what people need to realize is that stress plays a role with every other habit, in your day-to-day, right? So not only on a physiological level, where we can say, okay, stress is going to raise that blood pressure. It'll cause your, sympathetic nervous system to always be activated, your muscles to get tense, and et cetera, et cetera. But when you're stressed, do you binge eat, right?
Yep.
When you're stressed, how are your relationships? Are you more angry, right? How is stress playing a role in terms of all the other factors? When you're stressed, are your workouts healthy? Are you even working out, right? So I think that's what people need to start understanding, is stress is not just stress. It's this thing that is, everywhere in everyone's lives, and it just permeates through our daily habits, right? So I think that's why stress reduction is so crucial, because it literally affects every other thing we do.
I would actually challenge you on the concept to say, and I think that I know what you mean is, I don't really know if we can reduce stress, to be honest with you. I think we can become stress resilient, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think the stressors are just not going to stop. Like we're talking right now, for those who don't know, we've been trying to schedule this and reschedule on this, and now we're crunched on time too, because you got to pack and you got to. So that's just not going to happen. I think that as the older we get, we learn is we just get more and more stressors in life. But I think it's building stress resilience, and yeah, like you just mentioned, it's really a cascade of events that happens. And so, so you zoomed out for a second, but I'm going to zoom right back in, and at the risk of being myopic, I was kind of looking at the literature because I am fascinated with cardiovascular disease. And I came across this study in Nature Reviews Cardiology, which was published in 2012, just looking at the effects of stress and the cardiovascular system. And some of the key points from it, they were talking about psychological stressors, which contribute to cardiovascular disease at, several stages, including both acute and long-term development of coronary artery disease. And they also noted that, looking at some of the epidemiological data, that acute stressor trigger cardiac events like myocardial ischemia, which is heart attacks, right? I think that both of us have read and are fans of Matthew Walker and in his book, and some of the AHA, he has even documented that just daylight savings time, that loss of sleep, the sleep deprivation, which is an acute stressor, the rate of heart attacks increases by like 20-something% from what I recall. Right. So many of those acute stressors that can happen. It could be a massive breakup. It could be divorce, something like that. So these psychological stressors can cause, just acute stages can cause these events, right? In this paper, they also talked about how chronic stress at work and in private life, again, is associated with 40 to 50% increase in the occurrence of coronary artery disease in prospective observational studies. I mean, that's not insignificant, right?
Yeah.
And then the last piece of it, indicators of elevated long-term stress, such as social isolation and work-related stress, are associated with poor prognosis among patients with established coronary heart disease. So basically, all of 2020, social isolation, right?
That's right. Yeah, and Dr.
Yeah.
Frates mentions that, right, in the podcast. Like, she really emphasizes how social isolation this year can be a huge contribution to ailments and things, right? And I guess that kind of takes us down the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine, which is the foundation, right? And so I can just quickly list these off, right? So the first one is adopting a nutrient-dense, plant-predominant eating pattern. Number 2, optimizing and individualizing physical activity plans. Number 3, improving sleep. 4, managing stress with healthy coping strategies. 5, forming and maintaining relationships. And then 6, cessation of tobacco use and other unhealthy habits, right? So that's what this podcast, Medicine Redefined, essentially talks about. Every episode is one of these pillars. And oftentimes we like to just delve into these. But to go back to that social isolation, I mean, yeah, that's absolutely huge. And I think we're starting to realize that now, as this, if we could say this pandemic, if there's any blessing behind it, it's to show us how much our health matters, right? Not only just with COVID and our lungs and the cardiac component, but also this intangible component that we can't measure, right? These social relationships.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned at the time, and both we talked about kind of our 5 pillars of health, right? And one we don't emphasize or give its own bucket is the social isolation thing. Again, because it's hard to prescribe, right? Like, go spend 20 minutes with your wife. Like, what? Like, that's ridiculous. She's not going to be happy with that prescription, right? So, but I think we need to pay a lot more attention to it, because she had mentioned some of the early work from Alameda County, which is out on the West Coast. And we know that the blue zones, right? The one, like over Loma Linda, California. Yeah.
Too.
If there's, the 7 blue zones across the world. But one of the main pillars when they look at these centenarians, right, people who are 100 and beyond, is they're looking at that whole social piece, the spiritual piece. That's a big component of it, right? It's not just simply what they're eating, what they're exercising, but this is a big component of it. And so I think we need to pay a lot more attention to this. And obviously we've seen, like Dr. Frates says, it's hard to say people who are thriving, but you definitely know when it's broken, right? When somebody's, and over the last year and a half or so, it was broken and people were feeling the effects of it. I was feeling the effect of it. And I think that actually another one, Adam Grant recently talked about, I remember he made a post about Netflix binging and how that's a temporary escape from reality, and it's not necessarily a cure. People tend to do that a lot. I tend to do that. This is why I love Marvel movies. It's kind of an escape from reality. But I'm going to quote him. He had talked about, passive engagement in a fictional world doesn't offer a lasting sense of meaning, mastery, or mattering. Flourishing depends on active participation in the real world, creating, connecting, and contributing, right? And he's talking about like finding those people who are close by you, right? Physically, maybe touching him, and beyond just like holding hands and stuff like that, and how that causes like these endorphins and chemicals released your body. That's going to put you in a better position overall, and it's going to just have magnitude of orders of benefit for your health.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam Grant's great with that stuff too. It's always great to hear his perspective from like a psychological perspective, especially as we contribute to society, right? And that's kind of what he focuses on. Going into kind of our next topic that Dr. Frates talked about was how she interacts with her patients, right? And you asked her, from a reductionist standpoint, what is that, like the lowest hanging fruit? Is it diet? Is it stress resilience? Is it sleep? What is the first thing that she would focus on with her patients? And she said it depends, right? A lot of times you don't figure it out at that first visit. It takes the second or third visit where you start to build that rapport and they start to drop hints, and she talks about how the one patient she had says, hey, isn't it normal to kind of just down a bottle of wine nightly? Is that what people do? And she's like, oh, there's the red flag. You're probably drinking too much and this is kind of your escape. So But the thing is that she didn't want to focus on cutting down the alcohol. What actually made her feel better was the improvement in diets. And, when you improve your diet, she started to see the effects of cutting down the alcohol. And so Dr. Frates talks about, when you have your patients in front of you, it's about meeting them halfway, right? It's not about forcing a prescription down their throat. It's about figuring out what is it that they can best do, the next day, the next month, next week, and then the next year, and then kind of add on to that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And, people, I know a lot of times people hate hearing that answer. It depends, because like, oh, that's such a cop-out answer, but it's honestly, it's all about context, right? We keep coming back to this one word. It might be the theme of our podcast.
Right.
And, again, we as clinicians and healthcare providers have to understand our biases too, right? For me, again, the easiest thing to do is exercise. That's something that's like imprinted in my DNA and from an early standpoint. And so for me, it would be like, okay, it's easy to prescribe. That's the first thing that I would tend to ask about, but that maybe that's not what the patient needs, right? And it doesn't even matter like if we can figure out the efficiency standpoint, like which is going to have the most bang for buck, which is going to have the most benefit when it comes to health span or lifespan. Does it even matter if the patient can't do it or if the patient isn't ready for it? No, it absolutely freaking doesn't. So you have to meet the patient where they are. I mean, we've talked about this with multiple guests. We've talked about this with Dr. Arnie. We talked about it with Dr. Malenga. We've talked about it with basically everybody who's come on. So, I mean, hopefully people keep seeing these recurrent patterns, and our colleagues can understand, hey, maybe that's what it's about. Right?
Absolutely. So. Yeah. And like last point here, I just want to talk, I know we have a lot of colleagues who listen to this, is that the mission of lifestyle medicine now is to kind of spread it throughout different institutions across the country. And, we've talked about getting board certified eventually. It was something that I'm trying to bring to my program here at Hershey, and hopefully that's something that can happen in the near future. And for you, you're going to do the experiential pathway. I can't say that. I can never say that word. But you'll get board certified eventually once you're in practice. So for anyone who's up and coming, there's pre-medical students, the medical students, even, residents, if you're interested in this type of stuff where you can get lifestyle certified, I highly recommend going to the ACLM website and see what you can do, right? These people are super helpful. You've been in contact with them, Altamash, and they've been nothing short of exceptional in terms of guiding you in the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah. They've been really, really awesome. And I love what they're doing. Again, one of the challenges is, we could, on an individual level, as clinicians, we could educate ourselves. And I mean, that's part of it. But the other cool thing that they're doing is the advocacy component, right? Getting in front of the people in Washington and making systemic institutional change that's going to help reform the system a little bit better. And what the cool thing about them is, when it comes to, medications and some of the quote unquote conventional types of medicine, it's not dismissive of that. Like, how can we use all the tools in our tool belt to make it? And, it really starts with foundational components, which are the 6 pillars, but then also using some of the ancillary stuff and what the traditional sense of the model is. I know you're short on time here, so
sure.
The last thing. So actually, let's switch gears. Let's talk about Dr. B, because I think this is the topic that you've been waiting for basically since we started talking about this. So I know there were so many gems in here. So Dr. B, man, I'm gonna give you the first word on this. Like,
dude, what a cool guy, man. Right? Like, what a cool guy. I listened to the episode probably like 2 times because oh my God, like he's such a prolific speaker. Like, he just knows how to take the research and put it into what lay people want to hear, right? As well as practitioners. Like, there's just so much knowledge in these episodes. And for those of you guys listening to this, if you haven't listened to episode 16 and 17, like, please go back and do, because there's no way me and Altamash can do justice in terms of talking about gut health the way Dr. B does. But, the first thing I kind of learned is just the importance of gut health, right? And why. And I mean, we can take this in so many different directions, but just starting, very basic is what our gut does, right? You takes this food, but not only that, but it's also linked to our brain, right? People have heard of the gut-brain connection. We know about 80% of our immune system resides in our gut, right? So there's a huge play there. And then just talking about IBS, right? IBD, mental health, all these issues, a lot of it can be triggered by the gut itself, right? And especially with all these new fad diets coming out where we talk about vegan or carnivore or keto, well, the food has to go somewhere, right? It goes to the gut. And so I think people oftentimes forget about what is the gut doing with specific foods, whether it's dairy or gluten, which he talks about. But man, I mean, I can take this in all different directions. I'm going to put it back to you. Where do you want to start?
I think that just at the sake of kind of making sure that we appreciate the and use the appropriate terms. I think for most people, we just use the word microbiome, right? And
Mhm.
it's important to understand that the microbiome, and when people think that, they think bacteria. But as we know, because we kind of follow experts in this spaces, there's much more than that, right? The microbiome is kind of this genetic expression in the environment versus the microbiota, which are the actual bugs, the actual bacteria. I mean, you also have viruses, right? You get the virome in there. You've got the mycobiome, right,
Right.
as the fungi, and then the archaea, which is something that is
Yeah.
fascinating. These single-celled organisms that kind of have been around for billions of years. What was really fascinating to me, again, kind of tying it back into coronary artery disease, what we've been talking about at the beginning of it, is how it, they one of the purposes of the archaea is to kind of help break down TMA, right?
Mhm.
And which has been implicated in coronary artery disease. And of course, me being the novice that I am, asked him the question about, hey, like, do you think that, what kind of, what's the purpose, right? Could this be help like a preventative thing? Because that's what the scientists do, right? That's what we do. Again, this is that myopic point of view, which is why it's important to talk to these experts. And in his response was, its context is important. Their behavior, you can't isolate them and say, hey, whether they're going to be beneficial or they're not going to be beneficial. But guess what? I found a study in a quick research, just a quick literature review. This paper was published in 2014 in Gut Microbes called Archaebiotics. It's a proposed therapeutic use of archaea to prevent trimethylaminuria and cardiovascular disease. And I haven't read it yet, but we'll link it in the
Yeah.
show so if people are interested, because that's what we try to do. And I think from an academic standpoint, again, this is just me saying without having read the paper, that I think from an academic standpoint, it's one thing to kind of look at it from that perspective. Okay, these archaea help metabolize or increase the expression of TMAO, right, which is helps with CAD, but that might not necessarily be the way they behave in isolation, right? The context of the analogies that he gave of how we hang out with our buddies and how we behave differently is really, really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, going further on that, he talked about short chain fatty acids, right? Which is kind of this
Mm.
backbone of gut health, right? And for those of you guys that don't know, Dr. B is the author of a hit book, which actually it was a New York Times bestseller called Fiber Fueled. And I've read it and highly recommend it to everyone out there to read. Because again, it's not a preachy book. It's not telling you, hey, you need to do this. It gives you a suggestion and then talks about a lot of research behind why plant diversity and fiber is so important. And one of the things we know is that fiber helps these short chain fatty acids get produced. And with these short chain fatty acids, as the research keeps showing, so many different effects, right? It helps to protect something from, what we call leaky gut, right? Which is intestinal permeability. So those tight junctions can actually stay tight in your gut. Other things that we know short chain fatty acids do is help with the gut brain connection, right? Things with serotonin, dopamine, the neurotransmitters. And then again, also with the immune system. So this is, I just think the future of GI is exponential. And, there's so much coming out. There's so many companies coming out trying to individualize gut health, right? And I think that's what's important is that we know everyone's microbiota is like a fingerprint. It's so individualized. So for me to take, a line probiotic is going to affect me differently than, let's say, you take it, Altamash. And this is why I think why we can't just take probiotics, right? There's so much more to it. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to Dr. Rhonda Patrick's latest episode about the glucose monitoring. Yep. So it's a fantastic episode where, he just talks about, I think it was Dr. Michael Snyder, where he talks about gathering so much data. And, I my ears really perked up when he started talking about GI and the data that we can use with, stool samples and things like that. But again, super, super individualized. And all these things are going to be connected. We know that the food you eat, I could eat white rice and might not be affected. Whereas Altamash, I don't know if it's true for you, but if you eat white rice, hey, you might be in the bathroom 5 seconds after, who knows? Right. So I think we need to start paying attention to the foods that we eat and how we feel after, right? Like we have to be more attuned to our bodies because those tests are so expensive right now. There's no way you can do them daily or monthly. I mean, some people obviously can, but right now the best tool that we have is using our intuition in ourselves and really understanding how our body feels after eating certain things, at least.
Although, in terms of the cost of tests, I will say that it's getting better. Actually, Dr. Mark Hyman's podcast recently published. What's it called? Doctor what pharmacy? The doctor's pharmacy with an F.
Pharmacy. Yeah.
He actually had an expert. I forget what the name is. Daniel something. Out from Stanford as well. They talked about personalized medicine and personalized nutrition type stuff. And they talked about how it used to be, I don't know, hundreds and thousands of dollars back in the day, to now it's like a couple $100 where you can try to afford these. In fact, in a second, we'll talk about the American Gut Project, where how you can participate in that for just $99. But this concept of dysbiosis, right, the leaky gut that you're talking about, one of the things when we asked about like gluten and lactose, which is a can of worms that we probably shouldn't have opened. I mean, there's so much to touch on. But anyways, what I found interesting was him talking about how both lactose and fructans, right, are great prebiotics. However, people don't tolerate them. I think people kind of look at it and it's like, oh man, these cause me trouble. And the way he explained it is the issue is that the guts are so far gone. They're already so damaged that they're not capable of tolerating this strong prebiotic. Right. And fructans similarly are very good. But again, our guts are so damaged that they're not capable of handling it. Obviously, some people can. It doesn't bother them.
Right.
Like my family, right? I've got a couple of folks that don't tolerate lactate is always sitting there. But to me, like it seems to be doing okay. So again, context is everything. Right. And so the way I look at it is kind of a like advanced training protocol. Right. Bring it back to exercise for myself again. Right. If you get into the gym and you just like we'll just use squatting as an example, and you throw 300 pounds on the bar and you've never squatted in your life, unless you're just genetically this Hulk type creature, it's going to be a problem. Like you're going to crumble under the bar, you're going to get hurt. So you have to kind of build up, right? And that kind of applies to the same thing. It's like same thing with swimming. If you just jump right into the deep end, you've never swum in your life, like things are not going to end up well. So you kind of have to train to get there. The best part about training the gut, though, it's pretty easy to do. Of course, going back to diet is the number one thing that we can train our gut. What was really encouraging is him talking about the return on investment on to change these gut bugs it's really, really short and it's really good, right? So because they're procreating a new generation every 20 minutes. So within 24 hours, you can drastically change your the diversity of the microbiota. And I thought that was really cool, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to like warn people though, right? So it's 20 minutes, but as like we heard in Dr. Michael Snyder talk about this, you need long lasting change and for that microbiota to stay healthy, right? So, and I think this is the toughest thing for people is that they'll eat very fiber rich one day for maybe a week, but then, oh, let me get that Hershey's milk chocolate out and this and that. And, oh, well, it's about the consistency and it's about the long haul consistency, right? So that I think is very important. But yeah, no, I'm really glad he brought up the whole dairy and gluten though, because man, I see it everywhere in marketing. My own family like brings it up a lot in terms of dairy and stuff, and I'm glad that he's not villainizing, if that's a word, gluten or dairy, right? It again, like you said, it's about the context. I do want to shift gears into fiber though, right? Because that was episode 17 was very much about fiber, and I found it super interesting when he brings up the Hadza tribe, right? So this is a tribe out in Africa that doesn't shop at grocery stores, right? They hunt and they gather, and their poop is known to be probably in the world the most diverse, right, of bacteria, of the microbiome, I should say. And we also know that their microbiome's constantly changing with the seasons, right? So now it kind of brings up this concept of eating seasonally, right? And which is something we don't do in the US, right? You go to the grocery store, you can get blueberries all year round, you can get strawberries all year round, you can get, whatever you want all year round.
But they're not always good though. That's important.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can taste blueberries in the summer versus in the winter, and they taste completely different, right? I mean, again, it comes back to just being attuned, and like something I've been trying to do a little bit more now is just look at when I should be eating certain fruits, just so I can like seasonally eat them. Because again, I mean, we can take this into so many different directions with pesticides and stuff like this, and is it really being grown artificial or organic and stuff? But that for me was really interesting to talk about in here about the Hadza tribe.
I agree, man. I think that, I know we got to come to a close here because we're short on time, but the actionable thing from it when we're talking about the therapeutic dose, although he mentioned the recommendation by the RDA, which is a different topic in itself, is what 38 for men, grams of fiber, 25 grams for women.
Yeah.
That's not, he doesn't recommend that in his practice, nor does he count fiber for himself. What he does count are plants, how many plants he eats.
Mhm.
And I think he said that he tries to get as many as possible, although I've mentioned him in the past talk about trying to eat more than 30 plants just to try to improve that biodiversity, which is what you're talking about. And where does that number come from, right? This number of more than 30 plants comes from this really cool study called, it's an ongoing research basically study called the American Gut Project. And for those people, I mean, we can link the information in here who don't know. Basically, the American Gut Project is it's like the first large population-based citizens science, and this concept of community science it's based out of University of California, San Diego. And, they're collaborating with a total of like 44 other countries. So basically it's 45 countries where you can kind of just sign up for like $100, send your poop in, and they kind of analyze it for you. And ultimately what they found is, individuals who ate more than 30 plants per week had the most diverse microbiome, right? And individuals who ate less than 10 didn't have a robust diversity. Similarly, there were some other cool things that they found across this. People who had antibiotics within the last month had less diverse profile. What was interesting, though, paradoxically, they also found that individuals, I think, who were eating maybe a lot more, people who did have antibiotics had a lot more chemicals in them, right? Which kind of is stuff that needs to be explored a little bit more. So I think that's where it comes, right? That's the therapeutic dose that you're trying to get more than 30. When I try to relate that concept, back to what Dr. Beth Frates said, she also says she tries to do 8 a day, right? She tries to do 2 fruits and 6 vegetables, right? You do the math on that. If it's 6 different vegetables, right, and 2 separate fruits or different fruits, if you're talking about seasonally, that's what, 8 a day times 7 days. We're talking 56 plants. Killing it.
It's pretty awesome, man. And like, dude, the toughest thing for me is food blogging, right? Like I've used MyFitnessPal, but it's so easy with packaged foods, right? Because the scan code's there. But when you're talking about organic vegetables like broccoli and stuff, like, man, that stuff is so hard to put. And then me with my like data analytic mind, I'm like, well, is this actually a medium apple or a large apple? Like, I don't know. And that stresses me out, right? So, I mean, hopefully the science gets there. But I think one of the best ways to reach these goals, again, is kind of what they're doing is, Dr. B has this concept of plant points, right, from his book. So you get a certain point for whatever number of plants you get. And, your goal is to try to increase that, at least get 10, 15, and so on. And so that's what a lot of people like on Instagram do is they put, they'll tag him and put how many points they got in a certain meal. But I think that's just a very achievable way of going about getting fiber. So, yeah.
I like that. I will say, though, just like for disclosure, like, again, before I tell you that, I want to ask you, because are you vegan or vegetarian?
I'm vegetarian.
Okay. What is the reason? Is it more from like ethical perspective? Is it health related reasons? Is it more religious reasons? Like what's your reason?
Yeah, it's kind of all three. So grew up vegetarian because of religion, but I'm not religious. So that kind of went wayside. Then for me, it was kind of the ethical and just like health reasons for it.
Interesting.
Yeah. For me, just kind of, it was more plant-based. It was just easier for me to do. There's obviously the research on like meat and all that is very just like gray area. But for me, I always thought like, hey, there's nothing wrong with just eating plants, right? Like I haven't found anything wrong to just do plants. I'm pretty physically fit. I can outrun most people. I can outlift most people. I have good genes for longevity, hopefully. And my grandparents are doing well. My grandma celebrated her 91st birthday 2 days ago. So
nice.
So, that was mainly the reason for me. I think a lot of it comes from the ethical standpoint of it, though.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always go back to, again, which lens are we looking at the problem from, right? And that's how you come up with the solution. So are you supplementing with protein as well, or no?
Yeah, I do. I do protein bars. I do protein powder. Yeah.
I see. That's always been an issue. Like, in my previous life when I was working with clients and stuff, and they were asking if they were vegan or vegetarian, that's one of the struggles that they get, right? Is how do I consume enough protein? And again, ISSN, which is my favorite resources when it comes to dealing with athletes in, my sports medicine world, when we're talking about athletes, and again, the appropriate amount of protein intake for performance, for health reasons, but also for just hypertrophy, when you're talking about dealing with bodybuilding and stuff like that, people who are consuming upwards of 250 grams of protein, it's going to be very challenging to do that only on a vegetarian diet or plant-based or plant predominant diet. So I always had some hesitancy about, going completely plant-based, but I think that there's a difference being saying plant-based versus plant only, right?
Right.
And I think that it comes back to, we have to look at, okay, when we were looking at, okay, is plant-based good or not? Then the question we need to ask is for what purpose, right? Again, context is key. One thing worth mentioning, his point of view was, he said that I am looking at it as, how can we optimize health? When we're talking, we're looking at the body of the literature, and we're looking at, for the purposes of just health span, right? Getting more plants in our diet is going to be beneficial. And one thing, that I do want to mention is, I kind of recently read this article called The Credit Issue. It's from ACLM. They had put it in there. And in this article, they were looking at just what the effects are of eating a lot of meat, which we do in the Western diet, and also how our environmental factors can change. Right. Currently, the food production and consumption contribute to 20% of greenhouse emissions and account for 90% of freshwater consumption. Right. And that our current population is 8 billion people. By 2050, it's expected to go up to 10 billion. And so the demand for emissions and the demand for agricultural land is not going to be compatible with the need for better environment and in turn better health for us as a species. And so the plant-based industry currently is 14 billion. It's expected to grow to 1.4 trillion, right? We were talking about Beyond Burgers, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so they actually, this is a really cool article, we'll link in the show. They actually show how people who are on a vegan diet, a vegetarian diet, has significantly less, emissions from that type of stuff. So I think from that argument as well, I'm coming a little bit more to this idea. I still like my chicken, though. I still like my meat, though, man. And so it is a little bit challenging. But again, the purposes are different. I will say, though, what at least I don't want to speak for you, is what I will say. I'm not encouraging everybody to go completely vegan or for whatever purposes. Everybody have to make that decision. I'm not interested in convincing. I think that the evidence does, when you're looking at just health, when looking at coronary artery disease, when you're looking at overall better gut health, the evidence does support that getting more plants in our diet is going to be beneficial. I think there's no questions about that whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm the same way, man. I tell people, you got to self-experiment. If that means eating meat for a week and only, try it, see what happens, right? If that means going vegan, try it. The only way we know what's best for us, and again, everything comes down to the individual, is by self-experimenting and figuring out what works for you, right? And that might be a little bit different than, the next of kin or something, right? So I think everyone's truly different, and we just kind of have to figure out what works best for us.
Yeah. That's perfect advice, man. All right, buddy. I know you got to pack, and you're going to enjoy Europe and eat all this great food. And
cannot wait.
I am incredibly jealous of you, but fly safe, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, man. Everyone, thanks for joining in here. Again, episodes 15, 16, 17 were amazing. Hope you guys felt the same. And if you guys haven't listened to it, definitely go back and listen. And as always, we're coming at you with another episode every Monday. So, man, getting tongue-tied here talking so much because I'm not used to it when we have guests. But all right, everyone, take care. We'll see you next time.
Later. Well, guys, such a great show with my buddy, Dr. Darsh Shah. And before we finish up, I want to give a major shout out to Darsh for not only completing his intern year, but doing it with class and starting this amazing project with me to bring you guys great content week in and week out. For those of you in the medicine field, know how difficult and grueling intern year can be. And throughout the entire year, this guy continued to bring so much good to the world, not only by getting the message out on this platform, but he also continued to make the world a better place on all over his social media and anytime you have a chance to have a conversation with him. So I would highly recommend that you go follow him at dr.darsh on every social media platform, and you will be better for it. Now, before we go, don't forget to visit locumstory.com or drpodcastnetwork.com/locumstory to get real, unbiased answers to all your locum tenens questions. And for this important disclaimer, please remember that everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should it be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. But if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this as well. And until next time, thank you for listening.